Cadillac Escalade that came in. It's got a couple of different issues. Number one is a squeaking noise whenever the car rocks back and forth or you turn the steering wheel. As soon as I heard it, to me I was like, that sounds like a lower ball joint. And sure enough. And now let's come in here. Got my large pliers, as you can see. And to me the noise sounds like it was on the front right side, so that's where we are right now. All I'm going to do is grab my large pliers here and squeeze on the ball joint, and I'll see if I could get a good shot for you guys. But if you look closely, I'm trying to keep the camera as steady as possible. You see that ball joint moving? And that's what's causing our squealing noise or squeaking noise whenever you turn the steering wheel or the car rocks back and forth. Came over here and checked this wheel, and this ball joint is actually worse than that side. There's way more play on this side. So even though the noise sounds like it's coming from the front right side, this thing actually needs two front lower ball joints. We got this Ford Escape, just got dropped off. If you look at the front wheels, you can see it has a lot of negative camber. See this side also. Well, he said the steering feels funny. It feels kind of floaty, and that's because the alignment's all out of whack because of the worn out suspension parts. So today it's going to get two new lower control arms that includes the lower ball joint already pressed into them, and a new strut assembly and stabilizer links. So let's go ahead and get all that stuff knocked out. All right, so that's it for the front right side. Got the new strut assembly in. I'm gonna wait on connecting the stabilizer link until I get the other side done. New lower control arm. We're using the, what I think it's the Mevotech TTX, like the tough terrain version of the lower control arm and ball joint. Do they hold up any better? I have no idea. I don't use them too often, and when I do use them, I normally don't see that car back here in the garage anytime soon, so I have no idea. But that's it for this side. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the other side. And that's it. There's really nothing to record on this car. Everything's going pretty straightforward. Got this Mazda 6 in the garage. Just a call out of nowhere. This was not a scheduled job, but I took it in anyway because I had some free time. So the issue with this one is I thought it was going to come in for brakes that are like grinding or whatever, right? Like normal stuff. But no, I get in the car, take it for a test drive, and the brakes aren't grinding, but the car doesn't really want to stop too well. It just feels like you have to push the pedal way too hard. Basically, if you had to do any type of emergency stop on this car, you're probably going to end up getting into an accident because it just doesn't want to stop all too well. So to me, what that felt like was brake pads or brake calipers that are seized due to rust. Like the pads don't want to move, or the slide pins don't want to move, and the brakes just can't do their job. So you got to push the pedal really hard just to get the car to slow down. And it's just it's a safety issue, especially with a young woman that drives this car. She drives around with a baby in the car, and it's just not safe. And we could already see a issue right here. So you can see the dust cover on the lower slide pin, and look at the upper slide pin. You can see, so that allows water and all kinds of crap to get inside of here. This car will be the end of me. The hacked Impala is back once again, pretty much for the same exact issue it was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Basically, when the car sits for a few hours, it needs a jump start. All right. And another thing the owner said is, which is kind of new, I guess, is once you go to turn it on in the morning or after it's been sitting for a while, it has an extended crank. And I just experienced that right now. The car sat for like 2 hours, go to crank it, and it cranked for like 3 or 4 seconds before it actually started. But if you shut it off and crank it, it turns on immediately. So it's only the first time you go to crank it after it's been sitting, which to me seems like a fuel delivery issue. I could be wrong, but let's just say it's bleeding off the fuel pressure way too fast. And the first time you go to turn the key, it has to build up that fuel pressure. But so this issue with needing a jump start all the time, either something is draining the battery. Is the alternator charging? I'm pretty sure the alternator is charging, but I just pulled it in. You can see the battery has a surface charge of 12.78 volts, right? So if we go ahead, do a battery test, cold cranking, I already put in 700 because that's what it says right there. And if we go ahead and test it, hit enter, it automatically fails the cold cranking test because it only puts out 464 when this thing is rated for 700. So let's do a cranking test and let's see what it does during the cranking. So I went ahead and cranked it up right now, and it dropped down to a minimum of 9.3 volts, and this thing flags it as okay. And it does seem to crank up pretty strong. I don't hear any hesitation like a weak battery. I'm gonna go ahead and start it up one more time. Let's verify that the alternator is charging, but I'm pretty sure it is. And yes, the alternator is charging, as you can see. Got my fuel pressure gauge connected. You can see we're at about, I don't know, 57, 56 psi. Let's go ahead and turn the engine off. Don't forget about the purple stuff. Purple fuzzies. That's where the bad juju's at. Anyway, so we just shut it off, right? Just keep an eye on the fuel pressure gauge. So it only took a couple of minutes for all that fuel pressure to die off. So this is going to be the first startup after it bled off all that fuel pressure. So let's see if it has a little bit of a extended crank. It didn't. Started right up. Maybe the car hasn't been sitting long enough. So a few days after I recorded this, the owner called me because there was some liquid underneath the car. So she brought it back, and sure enough, it was gasoline leaking underneath the car. There's actually a bad fuel line that's very close to the gas tank, and due to corrosion, it was just leaking fuel. So that explains why we're losing our fuel pressure, and I'm sure that explains her long cranking times, which is kind of random. But it all makes sense now. So that's why we were losing our fuel pressure. When I initially put these battery cables on this car, when it first came to me, there is a current sensor. You could see it right there. Now when it was time to put the sensor back on, I wasn't sure where it went, so I just took a gamble and I put it on the positive side, which is clearly the wrong side, because the car started throwing a code for it saying that this sensor wasn't in the correct location. So I had to put the sensor back where it belongs, and that's not as easy as it sounds, because you need to remove the entire harness from the box, the ground off of the starter. So it's a big pain in the butt just to get this sensor out of here and put it back where it belongs. So it's what I did. I spent the last hour doing all of that. And don't worry, I'm not charging the owner for it, because that was my screw up initially. So just kind of bit the bullet and redid everything. And now, as you can see, I got the sensor on the ground side instead of the positive side. So that's all taken care of. And while I was down there, I noticed that the oil pressure sensor was puking its guts out. I put my scanner on it, and it's reading like 129 psi while the engine is running, which is obviously not right. So we went to AutoZone, got a Duralast oil pressure sensor. Here goes the old one. And I just had my scanner connected because I had the car running a few minutes ago. The new sensor is now reading about 34 psi while the engine is running, which is normal. So it's working, and we're not going to set a check engine light for that anymore. It's not going to be puking out oil all over the ground. The current sensor is now where it belongs. And honestly, every time I go to start the car, ever since it's been here, it started up every single time. I cannot replicate what the owner's talking about. So my best guess at this point is to just let the car sit overnight and see if it starts in the morning, or if it has a dead battery and it's going to need to jump like what the owner's been experiencing. Alright, so I had about 5 minutes of footage of explaining what was going on with this car as far as the battery dying. And I decided to cut all that out to not waste anyone's time. So basically what I found out what was going on here is that the owner was sitting in her car pretty much almost every night without the car running and listening to music while she smokes. So yeah, that's what was killing the battery. Keep in mind, the owner is a first-time driver, so she had no idea that sitting with the key on, engine off, will drain the battery. And that's what was going on. The day that the car had to get towed over here, the night before, she was sitting in the car, listening to music, smoking, and she killed the battery. She went inside the house, didn't bother to try to start the car because she figured, Well, I'm gonna go in the house now. So when she came out the next morning, she thought that the battery died overnight, but in fact the battery was already dead from when she was sitting in the car. So I hope all that makes sense. Alright, so the Impala has sat overnight. Let's go ahead and see if it'll crank over. Well, there's enough juice in the battery to unlock the doors. We have power and starts right up. Guys, this thing does not have a parasitic draw. This girl just kept sitting in her car listening to music. And I say, whenever I say listening to music, I think you guys know what I'm talking about when people sit in their car. To say this car has a certain fragrance. So I'm trying to wrap this car up by putting on this underneath shield that goes on here. It's a pain in the butt to put back in. But while I was on here, I noticed the tires on this thing, and I mean, look at these racing slicks. Absolutely no tread on them at all. I'm here on the front left side, and I ran my hand inside of here, and the wire on the tire actually caught my glove. See the wire already sticking out the inside of this tire. You know what? When this car first came to me, I think part of the work, I can't remember, but part of the work it did was like lower control arms, wheel bearings, I think even tie rods. And guess what? They never took it in for a wheel alignment, even though I told them. That's why these front tires are destroyed. That's why that one's completely bald and that one has a wire sticking out of it, because they never took it in for a wheel alignment. So now I'm going to have to push them to do it and make sure they get on top of that, because this is not safe and it's going to cost them more money in tires than to just get a freaking wheel alignment. You know, it's crazy. Unfortunately, this is what happens to 9 out of 10 cars that I work on that have anything to do with suspension work. I always tell them, take it in for wheel alignment. Nobody ever listens to me. Why? All they see is the money. That's it. They just see the initial cost. Oh, about $75 for a front end wheel alignment. Oh no, I'm not going to pay that. The car drives just fine. Or if the steering wheel is just a little bit crooked, oh, I could deal with that. It's not a big issue. They don't understand how the alignment being off is affecting the car, the way it handles, the way it drives, the amount of money it's going to cost you long term. Oh, perfect example, that Jeep that got into an accident and we had to change, I think it was like a broken lower control arm. I'm trying to remember. But anyways, if you guys remember, the guy said he went through like 12 to like 15 sets of tires. Now he was buying them used. They were like 25 bucks a tire. But he went through like 12 to 15 sets of tires. He didn't want to get the initial problem fixed. He figured, I'm just going to keep changing tires. You know, they want this much to fix the problem, but tires are only 25 bucks a pop. I'm just going to keep changing tires. How much money are you going to keep investing in these cheap ass tires before you realize that, hey, I need to get this problem fixed because it's cost me way too much money? It's like the people who have like really bad power steering leaks and they keep adding power steering fluid. Well, it stacks up really fast when that fluid is just dumping right onto the ground. You know, let's just say you spend $150 in power steering fluid. That money could have went towards the repair. It is what it is. But yeah, most people are working their cars that I tell them to take the car for a wheel alignment. It never gets done. So here's a pro tip for anyone who has one of these parts washers and is using one of these attachments right here. The other day I was using it and I tugged on the brush a little bit too hard. And this thing actually came off while I was using it. So you can imagine it was spraying the fluid across the workbench here and spraying everything. So what I did to kind of have a quick solution is grab a clamp here, and I'm using the 10 by 18 millimeter. You see it right there. It still allows you to take this piece on and off, but what it's doing is it's clamping right behind the shoulder right here, so it's giving a little bit extra tension, and that way it ensures it won't come off accidentally. You want me to fix your car? Yeah. Okay, open the hood. Here's your problem, lady. You got no engine. You need a new car. Look at this. The tie rods are bad.
It's just a toy car.
I don't care if it's a toy car. This is danger. Look at these tie rods are bad too. Your wheel alignment is off. You should not be driving this car.
This is a toy car. I'm not kidding.
Oh, you're just kidding. Oh, okay. It's about 10 p.m. I got this Nissan Rogue here. It's got a parasitic draw. So I just basically put the car to sleep, hit the lock button, and I'm just waiting. You can see I got my meter right there. And oh, the reason why I started recording was, look at that air filter. Look how nasty that thing looks. So this thing is definitely in need of a tune-up, and when the engine is running, I could physically see it shaking. Not like it's misfiring, because it's not. It's just running rough. And when I see something like this, well, of course it's running rough, right? Then you take it out for a test drive, and the steering wheel is doing this. And the faster you drive, the worse it gets. There's something wrong with the front tires. I could just feel it, because if you start to slow down, the wobbling goes like this. The faster you drive, the worse it gets. So there's something wrong with these tires. And you can see they're all dry rotted. So anyway, yeah, owner is saying if you let it sit overnight, it completely kills the battery. So for the past few weeks, she's been disconnecting the negative battery every night, and that's what she's been doing. But she said it's getting really annoying to have to keep doing that, so she wants to try to figure out what's causing the battery to die. So last night when I was going through the fuses, I found 3 of them that were pulling some sort of amps. Okay, so the 3 that I found was airbag fuse, which I was not going to remove that one, because no, in car needs an airbag. And then this one right here, which is actually pulling the most, it's called, well, to me it seems like clutch switch, but it's spelled different. It doesn't have a T, but I'm assuming they're just shortening it. So clutch switch, even though this is automatic, I didn't know if it had something to do with the transmission, so I left it alone. But the other last fuse that I found that was pulling some amps said room lamp. Once I removed it, the amount of amps that were being pulled from the battery while it sat was reduced. And the lady said for sure if I leave it overnight, it's not going to start in the morning. So with the fuse removed, came out this morning. Before I even tried to start the car, I checked the battery and we had 12.4 volts. Came to start it, started right up. So at this point, she said it could stay here for a few days. So I'm gonna turn it off and it's gonna sit here another day, and let's see if it starts up tomorrow. So it's the next day. It's actually in the afternoon now. So let's go ahead and see if this Nissan will start up. Okay, for a second I thought I didn't want to start up, but it was actually not registering that I was pushing the brake pedal. But as you can see, it started right up. So the only thing I did was remove the fuse for the interior lights. As you can see now, these don't work, they don't turn on. But that's what I found was pulling a draw on the battery. So not even that one back there works. So they were pulling a draw on the battery even while the battery's off, or even while the car is off. I'm not gonna dig into this. I really don't do stuff like this, go real in depth and spend a bunch of time to figure out what's draining. And honestly, I don't even have the experience or the knowledge to do any of this. I'm just not very good with parasitic draws. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. So when it comes down to parasitic draws, I tell people I'll do what I can with what I know, but it's a mixed bag of nuts when it comes down to that. So I'm gonna tell the owner, for the time being, if she doesn't mind, just leave that fuse out. And if she really wants to take care of, take it to a shop, take it to a dealer, let them throw parts at it, let them shoot the parts cannon at it. But I'm not going to shoot the parts cannon at it. Having this fuse removed is probably the least of her problems. She was more concerned with the battery being dead, and it's such a pain in the butt to constantly be unplugging the battery every night and plugging it in every morning. And not to mention, your car is never going to run a drive cycle, so if you do ever have a check engine light or something, you don't really know, because you're constantly unplugging the battery. And when it comes down to pass emissions, it's not going to pass, because again, constantly unplugging the battery and resetting that drive cycle. I am back with this Nissan Rogue. It's the one that had that parasitic draw. I said I removed that fuse for the interior lights. It's been over a week and the owner now says that the car starts up every single morning. She no longer has to disconnect her battery. So she's very happy with it, and she said she does not care about those interior lights and she's perfectly fine with leaving it like that. She doesn't want to invest any more money in fixing the actual issue. She's happy with the way it is. She said she's just really happy that the car starts every morning now. So it's back for a tune-up, and last time, if you guys remember, how I pointed out how nasty that air filter was. Look at this thing. I think this is one of the nastiest air filters I've ever seen. This poor engine was starving for air. And when you turn it on, you could immediately feel that the engine is not running smooth. And I asked her, when's the last time this thing had a tune-up? She's had this car for years. She's never had a tune-up on it, so anyways, here goes a nice clean filter right here. So we got air filter, a cabin air filter, set of spark plugs, PCV valve, and a new serpentine belt. This thing has, I'm sure it has well over 100,000 miles, and you know, some of these things have never been changed, if not all of them. Here goes the cabin air filter. Honestly, not the worst thing I've seen. It's pretty nasty, but it's not the worst. The air filter on the engine was definitely worse than this, but let's go ahead and pop the new one in. So I got the new PCV valve installed, as well as the spark plugs, and everything was put back together. I just wanted to start up the engine to make sure everything was okay, and I can already tell that this thing is running way better. The engine isn't shaking, the steering wheel is not shaking, it's running super smooth. So yeah, this thing was way past due for maintenance. It's just it sucks, but whatever, it's getting done now. The last thing I have to do is put that belt on it, and this thing's gonna be all set. So now that I got the car jacked up, because I have to remove the wheel on the front right side to get to that serpentine belt, I decided, you know what, let me look at these tires, because I'm suspecting something is wrong with them. And of course, first thing I noticed on the front left side is we have exposed metal wires on the tire. So I hope you could see that. I'm gonna put my glove on here with one hand, but that's not gonna happen. Anyway, if I run my hand across here, here goes the titty on the tire, which I like to call them, just a lump. And here it goes right here. This tire is no good. There is a giant, massive lump right here. I'm glad to see I was right about calling a tire on this, because the owner was aware of this problem, but she was like, oh, someone told me I just need a wheel alignment. I'm like, no, that's definitely a tire issue. And of course, whenever you have a tire issue like this, that there's a titty on the tire like that, and it causes the steering wheel to pull as you're driving it, what it ends up doing is destroying ball joints and tie rods. In this case, the lower ball joint has some play in it, and the tire wobbles back and forth, and that's a result of the bad tire. So the bad tire, I mean, they both need to be fixed, but if they just replace that ball joint and don't do anything about this tire, the same exact thing is going to happen. We've got back here this Ford Focus. This is the one that my son and I put on that AC compressor. I don't know if you guys remember, but in that video I was complaining about how much this car vibrates like crazy. Like, it'll just shake the teeth right out of your head. So that's what it's back for, to change the engine mounts. Apparently these cars are known for the bad vibrations that make their way into the cabin. So I told the owner that don't expect this thing to work wonders, because this car just came from factory with vibrations. Here goes the old engine mount on the right side of the car. First of all, if you look right here, there isn't much of a gap. In fact, there's no gap at all, because once you put the weight of the engine on this thing, these two parts completely touch, and that's what transfers over the vibrations. Because if we come over to new one, you can see I could practically put my finger inside of this gap. So there is a massive difference. This one's nice and solid, and this one is completely destroyed. Alright guys, so I got the front right engine mount done, and now it was time to move on to the transmission mount, which would be this one right here. So this is the brand new one. But I ran into an issue, because the battery tray, which is this part, sits right on top of the mount, and you need to get it out the way. In most cases, the nuts come off, but in this one, the nuts were just so rusted in place that they weren't going to come off. I got one of them off that goes right there, but these two were completely just rusted in place, and I was this close to throwing in the towel and just telling the woman I can't do it. She's gonna have to take it somewhere else, because those things don't want to come out. But I decided to pull my tampon out and keep trying at this thing. So the idea I came up with is, I'm like, you know what, it's just plastic, let's just melt around it. So I grabbed a socket that's gonna fit right around the two nuts without any problems, as you can see. put it on my torch, I heated up the socket, and then I put it right around the nut right there, and I kept spinning this with my impact gun just to create like a cutting effect, and I did it on both sides, and you can see the result. Now we have 2 holes cut right through there, and it allowed me to remove the battery tray without any issues now, just as if I had removed the 2 nuts, and it came out perfectly. Now for anyone who's, you know, complaining about me doing that, there is no way around it, and really it's not that big of an issue because the battery sits on top of this tray. This tray is not going to move anywhere, especially if it still has 1 nut in place. Even if it didn't have that 1 nut, let's just say you had to do it for all 3, the battery is going to hold this thing in place. This thing is not going to go anywhere. All right, so I did the front right engine mount, I did the trans mount. The last one I have to do is the torque mount, which is underneath the engine, so I have to put the car up on the ramps. I just moved it back right now. It's first time starting it up after doing the first 2 mounts, and it's already a completely different car. I mean, this steering wheel is like perfect. It's like brand new. Even if you go ahead and put it in reverse, that's when you would hear the most vibrations. Still nothing. Going to drive, wow, it's it's a completely different car, guys. I'm not even joking. So let me go ahead and finish that last torque mount, and that'll be it for this one. You know, honestly, I think what makes the biggest difference on every time I do a job like this that has to do with vibrations getting into the cabin, it's always the front right engine mount that has the biggest effect on everything. If you're going to change one of them, go straight for that front right one. But this is amazing. I'm sure the owner is going to be really happy with this. All right, so I got that final mount off. You can see it right there on the floor. We'll get a close look at it in a second. Here's another pro tip. During the summer, if you have a go-to laying mat like I have right there, that's a Mako one or whatever the heck it is, over the years that thing has gotten filthy, and even though I try to wash it off, it's still filthy. And during the summer, you know, I like to wear sleeveless shirts, as you can see, and when you're leaning on stuff like that, it just feels sticky, nasty, and dirty, especially when your skin is already sticky from the heat. So I tend to just lay down clean pieces of cardboard. You don't get as hot, and it's not transferring all the dirt that's embedded in this thing. It's not transferring it onto you because you have a clean piece of cardboard. So it's just another pro tip during the summer. But here was the mount, or the torque mount, and you can see this one is nowhere near as bad as the other ones. And even though it's not torn, I still like to replace them because the rubber is not torn, but it doesn't mean that the rubber isn't fatigued, and the rubber, you know, breaks down over time, and it just can't do its job like it's supposed to. So on an old car like this, where you're changing, you know, the 2 top mounts, just because you see the bottom one isn't torn, it's not a bad idea to change it. All right, so taking a Focus out for a test drive, and it's driving pretty good as far as all the vibrations coming into the cabin. It feels pretty normal inside of here, so I'm sure the owner is going to be happy with this. And I think that's just about it for this one.